Hello, class. I'm going to talk to you about the three branches of philosophy. And if you can think about philosophy as being a tree, then the trunk of the tree would be the basic definition of philosophy. What's the basic subject matter that philosophy discusses? That's the trunk of the tree. And then you have these three major branches in the tree. So maybe we should talk about a little bit about what the actual topic is. What does philosophy talk about? And the simplest way that I can put it is that philosophy looks at the universal questions to life and existence, the universal questions. And as a way of juxtaposing universal questions, we'll consider everyday questions. For instance, if you bumped into somebody and said, "Hey, what's up?" That's kind of a universal question. Somebody texts you, "Where you at?" Or, just in casual conversation, "Hey, have you enrolled for your classes yet?" Any kind of stuff like that. "Have you eaten?" Stuff like that. For at home, they might say, or, "Have you done your homework?" That's an everyday type of question. That's not existential. It's just commonplace. But if somebody stopped you in the middle of the street, you were out, and somebody just said, "Hey, what's the meaning of life?" Or, "Is there a God?" You'd realize that you're now kind of like in a different world. Somebody's, "What? I don't even hardly know you, and you're asking me what's the meaning of life?" That's just kind of weird. Or somebody texts you, "Dude, what does it mean? What does everything mean?" You'd look at your friend's text and say, "That's weird," because that's not an everyday question. So philosophy deals with universal questions, right? And even before you took this class, you might have had in mind something of the subject matter, right? You're going to talk about in a philosophy class, is there a God? What is good? What is evil? What is virtue, perhaps? What makes a good life? What is everything made of in terms of matter or existence? What is the purpose of things? What's the best form of government? Can you hear how all of those questions are kind of universal in scope? They express kind of an overview of things about life and existence and God and good and evil. You might even put in that mix, what is happiness? What gives us the best chance at achieving happiness? Or what's the best economic system? So you can see that philosophy, it's kind of like the mother of sciences because it kind of like oversees questions that you might even see in sociology or in political science or in economics. It's kind of an overarching discipline, right? And that's why you always say, "What's your philosophy on things?" It's the overarching kind of viewpoint. And maybe I should say that in philosophy, even if you don't take a philosophy class, I always tell my students on the first day that I see them in a face-to-face classes, even if you never took a philosophy class, philosophy is going to happen to you. And the image that comes to my mind is that if you can ever see yourself in a car in traffic and you're running late and things haven't been going really well for you in the last week or the last month or just in general, and you find yourself slamming on your fists on the steering wheel, they're going, "What?" And your language might be even more colorful than that, WTF. What the hell, and you're just really pissed. Somebody next to you driving kind of looks over at you in your car and sees this mad person screaming in their car, and you're going, "Oh man, that looks really weird." Guess what's happening? You're having a philosophical moment. And the philosophical moment is something like, why am I always late? Why do I get myself into these things? Why the hell do I even have to go to this person's house? Why am I in this crummy job? Why does this shit or whatever always happen to me? You ever notice how when you're in the grip of something really deep like that and painful, you're probably expressing some kind of frustration at yourself or at the universe, and usually the overarching tone of all of that is, what the hell is going on? Well, that's philosophy coming into your life and saying, slapping you right in the face and saying, You've got to pay attention to me at some point. And I really believe that even most of you who would never take a philosophy class, you're not interested in philosophy at all, you can't escape, even if you're like that, you can't escape the philosophical content of your life. You can't escape it, because once you start getting a little bit older and a friend betrays you, or you can't really find yourself, and work doesn't seem to give you what you want, and you're in a relationship that's kind of stuck, or you might even get married early on, or you might even have a child. All these things are kind of stretching you, pulling you to kind of make you consider philosophical content, like, hey, what is my life all about? Why am I here? What are you doing to me, God? Why did you let this crap happen to me? Why did you let so and so get sick? Or you might hear about protests, or George Floyd, or anything that's going on in the world right now, the COVID pandemic, or downsizing of the economy, or any number of things, and you go, what the hell is going on? There are things greater than you that are happening, and you have very little control over any of that. You are having a philosophical moment. And I really think that people throughout all of time have had philosophical moments. I think people are philosophically inclined for the most part. A lot of you have friends that you'll say, man, that dude never thinks about nothing. Or my friend ain't philosophical, he just lives his life. And that's true. There's no one overarching statement that fits every human being, except y'all are going to die. Nobody's going to get away from that. No, probably some people live their whole life without asking really deep philosophical questions. They just want to live and just experience things. That's probably true. But for the most of us, we're going to have a moment or several moments, or you've already had them even as a young person, 13, 14, or 15, because you've already had something going on in your life that made you think, what's going on? Why is this happening to me? I really believe that you could be pretty young and have philosophical content in your life and have philosophical thoughts. I really believe that. It's not an age dictated matter. It can happen at any point of your life. And some of you are readers. Some of you are thoughtful. You'll look at the lyrics of songs. You'll look at something on the news and you'll comment on it. You'll be reflective. You'll think about your family, your parents' marriage. You'll think about relationships. You'll think about work, what feels right to you. Some of you are already deeply philosophical. I really believe that. And some of you had that in the back of your mind when you decided to take this class. Others of you, this is a 3-unit class, you don't have to think about it. I'm simply pointing and planting in your mind that I think life and just living, just being, has philosophical content. I don't think we can avoid it. All right, my point was made. Okay, so think of philosophy as being the trunk of the tree. That's where we talk about these universal questions. And then there's these 3 branches. Think of one going this way, one going this way, and one central big branch. It's a big oak tree. And on the first branch, we'll consider the first of the major branches of philosophy, which is called metaphysics. Maybe the best thing to do to talk about metaphysics is to give you a definition. Metaphysics. Metaphysics studies the nature of being. And that's not an expression that we talk too much about, being, right? Usually the only time you ever hear of being, you'll hear about thumb drive, collapsible thumb drive has being. I can tell you that this magic marker has being. I can tell you that this mouse has being. Many other things have being. Water has being, and air has being. The cosmos has being. Dark matter has being. The past has being. The future has being. There's the potential of being. And there's also thought being. If you really think about it, your dreams have being. You can say, well, I can't measure them. But they have being, don't they? They have being. They have existence. You can think about a thought. Think of somebody in prison saying, now, one of these days I'm going to get out. I'm going to have my freedom. And if you think about it, the idea of freedom kind of catapults this person to continue to have hope. So his thought, freedom, has being. So that's what you get that's the kind of the nature of metaphysics, right? It's the definition. It's the study of being. all those different kind of elements of being. So I want you to think about a table now, and I'm going to divide the table into two columns. And on one side of the columns, I'm going to talk about physics. Physics. And if you think about the word metaphysics, meta in Greek means before physics. Okay, but let's talk about physics. Now, some of you are not going to take a physics class. You're never going to take a physics class. Some of you already have, and some of you may be taking physics soon. But if you look at the table of contents in a physics class, you'll discuss things like velocity, mass, gravity, light, volume. You'll talk about basic concepts like that, right? Time, space, light, gravity, acceleration, volume. Some of those things excite you and some of those things might not excite you at all. Okay, but that's what you would get in a classical table of contents in a physics class. In metaphysics, the other side of the column, you actually will, if you think of the things that are in that side of the column, it's things like, how did anything come into being? See, in a physics class, you're measuring being. You're trying to quantify being mathematically. You're trying to wrap your brain around the concept of being using mathematics to give you an insight into the nature of being. But in the discipline of metaphysics, you're asking, okay, before there's being, what was there before there was being? Metaphysics. So you're asking yourself kind of the question, what was before the Big Bang? The Big Bang is the measure of being, right? But what was before the Big Bang? How did the Big Bang come into being? What were the elements of the Big Bang? Can you hear how metaphysics gets into subject matter like God, or a supreme being, or the first cause of things? You know, something that's pre-existing being, metaphysics. So it's kind of interesting. It's a study of what happens before being, the questions before being. And metaphysics also looks at being. There's also an overlap between physics and metaphysics. I mean, metaphysics doesn't always just or focus in on the questions before being. It focuses on the nature of being itself. So we ask things like, what is monism? Monism, if you can hear of mono. Monism is the study of, it's an element of metaphysics in which you tend to think that all being is one, like one big thing. I mean, you can see people and pens and desks and computers and mouses and all these things that are in this room. There's different objects, but ultimately, if you are a monist kind of sees that everything is made out of Legos, just different elements and combinations of Lego. Like when you ever go to Legoland, any of you have been to Legoland, you'll kind of notice they make all these different forms. I remember seeing the Empire State Building made out of Lego. You know, they'll create a bridge or some kind of animal, but it's all made out of Legos. Notice that it's all made out of one thing. It's a Lego. Different colors, different kinds of sizes, but it's all Legos. A monist would believe, a monist, if you were a philosopher and you were a monist, you would see that everything was kind of made out of one particular thing, right? And you know, you could even think about that in a modern sense, is that everything's made out of atoms, molecules, and things like that. You know, underneath the plurality of things, there's one central thing. A monist would believe that even underneath all the molecules, there's even something underneath all of that, which is typical and which is common to all of being. So you'll look at monism, you'll look at dualism, because some people think that matter is actually two different realities, the material reality and the immaterial reality, such as thought, or the unconscious, or spirit. So there's some people that see matter as being dualistic, and you'll see people like Plato and like Rene Descartes were also dualists. So that's also an element of philosophy, of metaphysics. There's also pluralists. There's also idealists, people that think that underneath everything is nothing but spirit. So it's called idealism, or underneath everything is idea or a thought. which is kind of weird. So that's the idea of idealism. So there's all these different elements of metaphysics that come up. So anyway, so let me move on to the middle branch of the tree of philosophy, and that's another term that you probably have never heard about, which is called epistemology, right? You'd never hear about that. Epistemology. Wow, what is that? Well, that's a Greek word too, like meta, meaning before, physia, before physics. Epistemology is also derived from a Greek word episteme. I'll write it so that you can see the way it's spelled, episteme, and that is thought. The root of that word, Greek word, is thought. So it's the study of thought. So if you think about it, there's metaphysics, which is the study of being, but now there's this other element of philosophy, the middle branch of philosophy, of the tree of philosophy, which is thought, the nature of being, the nature of thought. Because that's also one of the things that, comes up in a philosophy course, right? There's not only the world that's outside of myself. Like if I look out of here on my room, I kind of see like a canyon below my window, and I can look at like hawks, and I can look at, all kinds of things, squirrels and rabbits that kind of appear outside, hummingbirds. I see all kinds of stuff outside my window. I live in Spring Valley, kind of like in a canyon. And there's all kinds of being going outside my window. But all of that being has to get into my head by something called thought, because there's the world outside myself, and then there's this interior world, and that's the world that we look at with epistemology. And that's where questions come up in epistemology, which is there anything real outside of my head? And I'd like to give you this little thought experiment that I sometimes give my face-to-face classes, but I want you to think about this for a minute. You think about this. Have you ever been downtown? You're coming into downtown into, let's just say you're coming in on F Street, and you're about to head on in. If you keep going down F Street after the 94 West, when you pull in on F Street, you got to go past, 16th, 15th, 14th, 13th, all the way, and then you finally dead end into Horton Plaza, which is kind of dying. But then or if you go into the Gaslamp District, you get off on 5th or 6th, and that's where you park your car. Well, what if you were coming in on F Street and you saw somebody on the side of the road, a street person with a basket, with one of those shopping baskets, and the guy's going, oh, and I told that person that I was going to fire him. And you roll up your little window in your car, and zzz, the window goes up, right? Because you're thinking, I don't want that dude to be hopping into my car at the red light, right? Basket person, the crazy man. Well, what if you saw a person out there kind of saying, looking like me and saying, and what you need to, in other words, you're looking at somebody on, let's say, 5th Avenue and F, and he's talking, people are walking by him, and he's going, and I told my students that they have to bring in their syllabus and buy their book, and I told that student to sit down in his place. In other words, what if you were seeing somebody like me talking, and I'm using my finger and gesturing, but the person that you're seeing is thinking he's a philosophy professor, but he's just on the corner, but he thinks he's still a philosophy person, even though he's a street person living underneath the freeway. So if you can think of that image, that there's a person talking on 5th Avenue and F, and he's talking, and he's even using the words that I'm using, but he's completely insane. So whose world is real? Your world inside your car as you're trying to park somewhere to get into the Gaslamp District, or this guy who thinks he's a philosophy professor who's talking like me, or even me as I'm talking in front of this camera. I think I'm employed by Southwestern College teaching a bunch of students a philosophy class, but I'm completely insane, and I'm talking on a street corner as if I was still employed as a philosophy professor. But I went insane several years ago, and now I live underneath the freeway. But I'm still talking on the street corner like I'm employed. That would be kind of really weird, and I don't know if this imagery is going to work for you. I could sell it a little bit better if you were seeing me in class. But anyway, I've used that image before to kind of express to you this problem of epistemology, which is, which world, your world or my world? Do you capture reality more precisely than I do? Everybody tends to think that your version of the world is the real world, right? In other words, you go, I know what's up. Everybody likes to use that expression, like, I know what's up. But do you? I mean, science will probably tell you that your impressions and your narrative of the world is very, very conditioned by your chemistry, by your genetics, by your predisposition, by hormone level, by whether you're a male, by whether you're a female, by your age group, by which century you're living in, what part of the country you're living in. I mean, if you were from Tennessee or from Kentucky or Alabama, and you're white or Anglo, and you're looking at the protests going on in La Mesa, where they started to burn stores down and stuff like that, tell me that you would have the same kind of impression about what's going on than somebody, let's say, from San Francisco or Berkeley. Your impressions would be completely different. Or somebody from Ocean Beach. Your impressions would be completely different. So you can see that the epistemological problem is a real problem because it has to do with who really can see or sense reality as it is. So let's think of another table again, another table. Let's do another table. And on one side of the table, let's think about neuroscience, cognitive science, something like which Robert Sapolsky at Stanford University talks about. And by the way, I'm going to put his name back up there in case you ever want to do a TED Talks, or if you ever want to just trip out on somebody who's doing the, how we perceive things and what's really going on in the mind. And it's a fascinating thing. This guy, Robert Sapolsky, is kind of like this dude who looks like he was, born in some kind of Celtic forest, and just a trippy little dude with long silver hair, kind of a dropout from them. But he's absolutely brilliant. He looks like he's about 5'3", just this real stocky little brilliant guy, all brain, Robert Sapolsky from Stanford. And he talks about all of these kinds of things. And, neuroscience, like what's really happening in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, all of these kinds of things that we have, the limbic system, the reptilian brain. Some of you are starting to hear about stuff like that. Right now, there's a lot of work going on in cognitive science right now because we're a generation, us baby boomers are getting older, and some of the brighter of our brains, even, of course, modern people are kind of looking at, the nature of the brain. Concussions in the NFL, concussions that soldiers face when they come back from war, where they have some kind of IED, and it kind of gives us this shock that gives them concussions. There's all kinds of brain work going on. And so if you think about one column, which kind of like highlights all the things that you get in neuroscience, you would see in that column things like memory, creativity, judgment, problem solving, fight or flight mechanisms, imagination, music, mathematics. We have all kinds of elements of our brain. All of that is being mind mapped by neuroscience. But if you think of the other side of the column, where you would have epistemology, well, epistemology also looks at thought and ideas as well, right? But again, since it's a philosophy class, it looks at those things from a broader perspective. Because like I told you, in philosophy, we look at the overarching question. So if in neuroscience, we're trying to look at where the brain does problem solving in the prefrontal cortex, we know that because they can do infrared imaging, and they can thermal imaging, where we can see that certain parts of the brain are more active when certain things are stimulated, such as problem solving, or when you have some kind of imagination thought. Children have this too. Anyway, so we can mind map, we can see where the brain is doing that. But in epistemology, we're looking at overarching questions. So in this column, when we're talking about epistemology, we'll ask, what is truth? What is certitude? What is falsity? What is idealism? What is empiricism? What is rationalism? All of those different kinds of sub-studies of the field of epistemology. What is thought? What is real? What is ideal? what exists in the mind and what is actually out there in the world of metaphysics. So if you can think about metaphysics and epistemology kind of forming this union, because metaphysics refers to the world out there that's also in me. I'm part of the metaphysical world because I'm part of matter, but epistemology is the way that my brain relates to that world. Can you hear how those are two overlapping elements of one reality? There's only one reality out here, at least one that we can see. People talk about all kinds of multiverses today and, different dimensions. So, let's not even go into that. That's just so esoteric. You're at MIT when you're studying things like that, right? The Massachusetts Institute of Technology. You're way wonkier than this class is going to get into. But think of metaphysics and epistemology as being not only the outside world and this world that I'm physically a part of and that you're physically part of. Epistemology is how I'm relating to that world, how I'm cognitively understanding that world, and how well can I do it based on the limitations of my human nature. Okay, so the last branch of philosophy, you can put this last big oak tree, would be ethics. And underneath ethics, well, some of you have probably thought about ethics before. I mean, that's one part of a philosophy class that you might have even heard of, right? Because you maybe haven't heard of metaphysics or epistemology, but you probably have heard of ethics. And that is one of the studies or one of the branches of philosophy. And as usual, since all of this work, all of this field of philosophy kind of originated in the Greek world, ethics itself, ethics, the word, is also derived from a Greek word, from ethos. In your English 114, English 115 classes, you guys have had things like logos and pathos and now ethos or ethos. And so ethos in Greek means character. Character. And I'm not talking about, oh, that dude's a character. Oh, he's so funny, man. You should listen to him spin a yarn. He's so funny. He tells jokes. He's a character. Now, the Greek word character, ethos, refers to character, like your character, your backbone, the person that you are. Do you have any character? Character is a person who, when they find a child walking around in a mall and he's left and his parents kind of, he's separated from his parents, that character of yours goes back and tries to say, oh man, I got to find a security cop. This little kid is lost in a mall. Or if you see a wallet or a cell phone, your inner ethos, your character says, man, I gotta return this. If that was my phone, that was my wallet, or that was my purse, man, I'd be all freaked. Or my keys. You guys have all freaked out when you've lost your keys. Well, somebody with ethos would return those keys or the wallet or the phone because they have character. So that's the root of the word, right? Ethics, ethos, character. So let's think of another column again, our final column in our little thought experiment, where ethics is divided into, let's say on one side, we can call it the legal profession. Because if you think about it, the legal profession looks at character, right? In the legal profession, it's going to look at things like, think about it in this column. You'd think about guilt, innocence. You'd think about culpability. You'd think about voluntariness, like how free was this person when they acted. You'd think about that. You'd talk about age. You'd talk about pre-existing conditions. You'd think about premeditation. You'd think about all those overarching conditions of the human act and what makes something either legal or illegal, right? The legal profession looks at ethics, business ethics, corporate ethics, media ethics. I mean, there's school ethics. There's always some kind of ethical discipline, right? In stock market ethics, that's where you have the ICC, which is regulating ethical trades. There's ethical food practices, right? And that's why you'll say, hey, Starbucks won't buy coffee from certain war-torn countries. There's blood diamonds that they won't buy because that's poor ethics in the diamond profession. There's ethics everywhere. There's even military ethics, you can shoot, but you have to have a clear field of vision and you have to kind of declare your intention. and you have to only use as much force as necessary, and you can't kill civilian targets. And this is even in warfare, where you think, well, there's no ethics in warfare. Absolutely. You do an illegal killing in warfare, and you've got all kinds of problems, especially if there was an embedded reporter who witnessed what you or your squad or your platoon or your battalion did. There's all kinds of ethics, medical ethics, legal ethics, like I said, military ethics, business ethics, restaurant ethics, food growing ethics. There's ethics everywhere, right? And the legal profession looks at a lot of different elements of those ethics, from corporate ethics to business ethics to economics, all of those things, ethics. But let's look at the philosophical field of ethics. Once again, you can see how it'll be a much more overarching kind of approach to this action. Because in ethics, philosophical ethics will ask, and I hope you can hear the philosophical dimension of this, you'll ask, what is right? What is wrong? What is the goal of human beings? What is happiness? What is unhappiness? What is our destiny? What is virtue? What is right action or right conduct? What is evil content or evil intent? What is motive? What is circumstance? Can you see there's some overarching things there? But in the ethics profession, in the philosophical ethics profession, you're looking at things much more from a philosophical content. What is right or wrong, and who gets to decide what is right or wrong? Is it decided by culture? Is it decided by tradition? Is it decided by religion? Is it decided by the legal profession? Is it decided by parents or ministers or religion? Or is it decided by reason? Those are really, really incredible questions to look at in ethics. I teach an ethics class myself, and that's one of the first things we do in an ethics class is what is right or wrong, and who gets to decide it? Or is it completely a subjective invention by human beings that changes and evolves in time and space? What we allowed to do in the medieval world is not something that we would ever allow to do in the modern world. And what we're doing right now in this world, which has racism and sexism and all kinds of inequality built into it, will we still have these same ethics, or will we progress 30 and 40 years from now? Because right now, if you think about it, bullying even 15 years ago wasn't ever mentioned. Now, if you're a bully, it's immediately called to light. If you were kind of like an abusive person toward, usually it's males, toward females, the Me Too movement has called you out. And that's been within the last 6 or 7 years. Same thing's happening with diamonds and food growing and GTOs, like GMOs, genetically modified organisms. There's so an exploding version of ethics that's coming into the world because we have so much more consciousness now, whether we should even use vaccines, whether we should get involved in economics, whether we should give out a guaranteed income to all people to kind of like keep people from poverty. There's things that we're discussing now that we never would have discussed before. The ethics of capitalism, that's being looked at. The ethics of environmentalism, the ethics of animal rights. You'd never hear about things that were like mentioning this 10, 15, 20 years ago, or maybe even a century ago. So ethics keeps evolving, and it's an amazing field. So what is right or wrong? So that covers like kind of like the main areas of philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And then if we really wanted to get into minutiae, if we really wanted to delve into it, we'd even see that under the field of ethics is the field of political science. Because if you think about ethics being right or wrong, you would think about, well, what is the best form of right or wrong government? Because that would fall under the field of human conduct, right? If human conduct, personal conduct, is what we talk about in ethics, what would be the field of conduct as civilizations or cultures get together and decide what's the best political theory for that particular culture. That would be poli-science. And then there's also little subdivisions where you would get into aesthetics, the study of beauty, which has its own little branch. So we're not going to get into all of those multi-little branches of philosophy. This is an introductory philosophy class, and we're going to stay with the three fields that I mentioned: metaphysics, epistemology, and then ethics. But there's other little subfields. Okay, Orozco out.